Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we're studying Numbers chapter 26. Let's get started.
Okay, so let's talk honestly about Numbers chapter 26. Now we're going to talk to you honestly because this is really what we just talked about. We don't want to put on a show. We're just going to tell it like it is. John, did you have fun reading this chapter?
Not at all.
Okay, what's so difficult about this chapter?
Well, this chapter, it was just like kind of very repetitive because it was just going like, and the sons of Asher was Billy and the Billyite clan.
Okay,
and
the Billy and the Billyite clan. I don't think that's in there, but I get where you're coming from. So Billy the Billyite clan. Have you ever noticed that that like of all the clans and all the people that we're reading about in the Bible, the one I always think about, like there's the Canaanites and the Amalekites and then there are the Jebusites. And I know the Jebusites are the bad guys, but Jeb, do you like the Jebusites? He said not really, but he's a good Jebusite. So we understand that. So not a fun chapter, but we do need to probably talk about why this chapter is important. So, John, why is this chapter important?
So basically, we had already counted all of the people, but that was when the people that were coming out of Egypt. And so we counted that. But now it's been like 40 years. So now we need to count the people that are going into the promised land. Okay.
So the book of Numbers means the book of countings, which means 2 times in this book. This book is named after half of what you're reading right here, where there's 2 countings of 2 generations of people. And there's those who came out of Egypt and those who are going to eventually come into the promised land. Now, John, catch us back up. What happened to all the ones that we counted coming out of Egypt?
Well, they're kind of dead.
They're kind of dead. Why are they kind of dead?
Well, so some of them, so a lot of them died because God sent the plague on them because they were worshiping Baal. And then,
why did the first generation die in the wilderness?
Because they weren't faithful and they didn't believe that God would take care of them.
Orville, be sweet. Quit acting like a Amalekite.
I think I accidentally grabbed him.
Oh, you grabbed him? Okay. All right, so here's what's happening in this chapter. This is the second counting. This is the next generation in the story of those who are getting to the promised land. That's why this is important, because this whole book is about these people leaving the wilderness and heading to the promised land, and these are the ones that are going to make it. Their mamas and their daddies have died in the wilderness. The wilderness is now covered with about 2.5 million of their people in graves all throughout, and now the next generations come up. Now, here's what you need to think of. Even after losing an entire generation, the first counting of Israel, when they came out of Egypt, counted enough soldiers. By the way, they're not counting everybody. They're just counting soldiers who are old enough to go to war, men old enough to go to war and young enough to come back. So just the soldiers. And there's 603,000 of them. When they all die, now there's 601,000 soldiers. So virtually God has just exchanged one group for the next. And he's always taking care of this. So what I like is in chapter 26, it begins with this. And it came to pass after the plague. Now, graciously, this plague did not last forever. Why? Because God's mercies are new every day. He's good. He stops the plague. So what we're reading about in kind of the outline of this chapter is that it gives us the inheritance process. When you get into the promised land, this is how you ought to do things. This is how people get their land. They're talking about how many people are in each tribe. It talks about Dathan and Abiram. Dathan and Abiram, they were the bad guys who tried to take Moses' place. And what happened to them? The ground opened up and what?
Kind of ate them.
And kind of ate them. So they're dead. Imagine being recorded in Scripture for like 4,000 years now. Just for the worst day, like your worst decision. Just being forever remembered by being the bad guy. That's not how you want to end up. But also it's a good reminder. One day somebody's going to remember you for something. So let's live like good and faithful servants so they remember us for the better things. It talks about Moses' family in this chapter, his mom, his dad, his brother, his sister, and just kind of fleshes out where Moses came from. And then it's going to talk about Caleb and Joshua. So there's a lot of names in this chapter, but everybody in this chapter is accounted for in a way where no name goes unmentioned and uncounted. Why? Because God is king over the whole nation, but he is father over the individuals. And that's what's powerful about this. The other thing is that as you're reading through this, we see God's plan. He's still going to use his army. So think about it. Warren Wiersbe said God could have sent angels to clean up Canaan instantly, but instead he chose to work through his children to lay out a time and a place and a pace to get all of this done. He chooses to work through his people. Toward the end of this chapter, we meet some people like the daughters of Zelophehad, and we get into their story a little bit later. They're wonderful women of God who really set up a good process for Israel. Even if we read through this and we go, man, I don't know what to do with all that. There are bits and pieces where I think we still kind of find some good takeaways, like the Levites. Who are the Levites?
So they're kind of like the priests.
Okay? They're the priests. They're the guys who work in what?
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle. Were they counted?
No.
Were they counted in this number?
No.
No. Why? Because they weren't supposed to be soldiers. The soldiers were going to go out and fight the physical fights. The Levites who worked at the tabernacle doing all the sacrifices, they were going to fight what?
The spiritual fight.
The spiritual fight. So you had two sides. You had the physical, you had the spiritual. The Levites weren't going to get involved in the physical. They were going to care only about the spiritual stuff of the community. Warren Wiersbe again says the Levites were to devote themselves wholly to the service of the Lord. And by the way, they weren't given land like all the other nations were given huge chunks of land. Instead, they were put in little cities all over the nation to spread them out among the people. Why? So that there would always be people around in the nation who would be teachers of the people. That's what the Levites were doing. And so they weren't going to receive land. They weren't going to receive a home. Why? Because God was their home. So even in this story, we find there's certainly judgment, but God still has a plan to use his people. I want you to know, when you read this, it tells us God does not forget his people. God cares for his people. He watches his people, and he has a plan for these people and for you. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter number 27. Bye.